Okay. Austin.
Okay. You want to, we need partial lights in here. I can't hardly in this thing. Oh, the arrow does work on the mouse. That's all I know. So we just go page down to change.
Good. I'll have to go back and put those here soon. So let's make sure it works.
You're good.
Okay.
We're recording.
Lucky us. Okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about wheat diseases and wheat fungicide use. And I'm also going to include some comments about small grains as well. I think we're aware that we have a little bit of an unusual year developing at this point in time. It was dry through most of the fall. As a result, a lot of the wheat and other small grains that are grown both as for cover crops, forages, and for grain didn't get planted. Or if they did, they didn't get planted until the end of November and into December. So we've got a little unusual situation this year in that the crop, such as it is going to be very late, which when you talk about diseases is actually a bit of a positive in that not having the winter cover, game food, and some of the forage plots out there, which are usually planted maybe even as early as late September into early October, can serve as an inoculum source for foliar diseases as well as viruses in small grains, and they're basically not there. So in all likelihood, we've got less inoculum pressure going into this year than maybe we've had in the recent past. So that's, from that standpoint, that's actually a positive. Because some of these other crops do serve a source, particularly for rust diseases. Now, of course, depending on what the weather does from now into early April will determine really whether or not we have some serious problems or not. If the weather stays cold as it was this week, that'll pretty well shut down all the diseases that we might be concerned with that could develop over the winter. If it gets wet out, particularly if it warms up a bit and stays wet, under those circumstances, we're more likely to see more disease activity in wheat and other small grains. So we'll just have to wait and see what the weather does from now on out as to how much inoculum pressure we're going to run into. And how do we change?
Did you do like a page down?
Yeah, I tried that.
This happened to us yesterday. Eddie and I were having some issues with PowerPoint.
Oh, wait a minute.
Do next.
Yeah.
Let's try that.
There we go.
Hopefully
We'll have to work our way through it.
Yeah.
All right. As far as rust diseases are concerned, there are three primary rusts in wheat, and we see some similar rusts in other small grains as well. Leaf rust, the image at the top, is definitely the most common rust disease that we see on wheat. We see very similar diseases on barley and oats as well. They can get established on wheat in the wintertime, but develop very rapidly in late winter and early spring under the right weather conditions. We almost never see stem rust. It's only shown up a few times in years past. Yellow or stripe rust does show up some in the Tennessee Valley. Don't really see it anywhere else in the state very often. It is very variety specific, and at least over the last few years in rating plots, it's very variety specific, and most of our commercial varieties really do not have serious issues with yellow rust. So the main one is that we're concerned about is leaf rust, and it's fully capable of reducing yields when it's not controlled on a susceptible variety by up to 50%. In recent years, we've done some work on oats with crown rust, and in On oats, for example, that yield loss can approach 100% given the right circumstances. So normally we're really looking for a rust in mid to late March, and it develops rapidly from that point on. As I said before, wet weather does bring it or accelerate the development of rust. And as far as the state is concerned, and this is true with foliar diseases in general, is that they're more, you tend to see more issues with them, and they're much more severe the closer you get to the coast. And then they tend to be less of an issue as you go further north, particularly in the Tennessee Valley. Most of the varieties do differ in their reaction to rust, although most of the ones we have in the market are not particularly susceptible. And one of the problems in managing diseases of the rust diseases is we're always using resistance as a really effective tool for managing these diseases. But over time, the genes, you'll develop races of the rust fungi that can defeat the genes that are available in many of our varieties. And in other parts of the world, that is happening with stem rust. Bloom blotch and septoria leaf blotch are two other diseases that we run into a good deal in the state of Alabama on wheat. I don't think they have the potential to reduce yields as much as rust does, but they can look ugly, and you can have a lot of damage, particularly from bloom blotch damaging the seed heads. So you would tend to see a reduction in seed test weight in those situations. So the bloom blotch is definitely the more damaging of the two, and is more of a statewide distribution. The septoria leaf blotch, I've only really ever seen it in the Tennessee Valley, and it does cause on some varieties noticeable leaf blighting, but as long as it doesn't get into the tops of the plants, it's really not having that much impact on yield. And it's oftentimes in the field trials that have been run in the state of Alabama, it's not always very easy to show a yield increase from fungicide use for control of these types of blotch diseases. But they're definitely like the rust. They are rainfall driven, so when we have a lot of wet, mild weather in mid-March on through the 1st of May, that's really going to push those diseases to develop. Mildew, we're kind of declining in severity. Mildew is oftentimes very showy, but its effects on yield are less than perhaps some of these other diseases. It tends to be a problem when we use too high a seeding rate or in turn rows, or where we get a doubling over of nitrogen rates, are those areas where you tend to see most of your mildew. On some varieties, in some circumstances, given the right weather patterns, it can turn wheat white, and it'll colonize. The fungus will colonize virtually every above ground part of a wheat plant. So it's not unusual to see powdery mildew on the seed heads. It tends to be a mild, cloudy weather disease, but if it rains a lot, that tends to actually suppress powdery mildew. So overall, it tends to have a lot less impact on yield than the other two diseases that I mentioned. And a lot of our varieties are fairly resistant to this disease. One disease that's gotten more attention in the past 4 or 5 years has been scab. It's not only the blighting of the seed head, because it's basically the only part of the plant that is affected by scab, but it's also the causal fungus produces mycotoxins. And we've had issues with this disease, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, and the buying points simply are not interested in purchasing scab-damaged wheat. A few years ago, they bought some and they got stuck with it, couldn't get rid of it. Most of our wheat goes into the baking industry, and the mycotoxins tolerance levels are fairly low for food stocks, and There are some other issues that come up with having mycotoxin contaminated grain. So they simply are not going to buy it. This is a disease that really does need to be controlled. It specifically develops when we have a lot of rain during flowering. If it's dry during flowering, you won't have issues with scab. But if you get a couple of showers in there when the weed is in bloom, and you get right temperature patterns, it could be off to the races. And this disease is specifically linked with corn production. So overall, it's not a good idea to plant wheat after corn, particularly if the corn has been no-tilled. The fusarium fungus that causes scab in wheat also causes fusarium stalk rot and gibberella ear rot in corn. So when you're planting wheat into corn stubble, there's a ready inoculum source, and the disease is much more likely to be a problem there. But we've seen scab outbreaks in wheat behind cotton, so it's just not only corn is vulnerable, or wheat behind corn. And as I mentioned, we do have the mycotoxin issues with vomitoxins, zearalones, and some other fumonisin toxins. And I mentioned here that you would get a significant discount at the elevator, but the reality is they don't want scabby wheat. And the other issue is some growers will grow wheat as animal feed, and those mycotoxins are an issue for some animals. Probably beef cattle are the least sensitive, but when you get into animals with simple stomachs, hogs, and some birds, scabby wheat's a real problem, and it's going to cause a lot of issues. So its value as a feed material or feed additive is minimal. If you look at some of the other symptoms of scab, if you look at a seed head that's been infected but not really showing a lot of symptoms, you'll see a distinct peak discoloration around the glume. That's the fungus sporulating on the tissue. If you go a few more weeks where the seed heads have already bleached out, you'll see clusters of small black bodies around the base of the seed and the base of the glumes. Those are the sexual fruiting structures of the fusarium fungus. It's a gibberella sexual stage. And of course, that's diagnostic for identifying scab in wheat. If you look at the damaged kernels, they tend to be greatly reduced inside and have a distinct pink cast to them as compared with a normal light or medium tan grain. And in image D, you can just clearly see the difference between the healthy and the scabby wheat. There is a model out there that growers can use, as well as the agents, to monitor scab development in either their crop or their area. It's a weather-based forecasting model, and at least gives the growers and you an idea as to whether or not scab is likely to develop, and then based on the forecast, the growers can then decide whether or not they want to come back with a over-the-top fungicide treatment. And these are the websites where this model can be accessed. Of course, right now it's down, but it'll start back up in the middle of March. We get into fungicide use, it gets to be an economics and insurance question. Fungicides typically are very similar to buying term life insurance. You're getting some protection for a short period of time. We're primarily targeting these foliar diseases that I talked about. When you get into some of the soil-borne diseases like take-all, root rot, there's nothing we can do about that. Economics-wise, we need at least 50 or maybe 60 bushels per acre yield potential in order to even begin to cover the cost of the fungicides, and then maybe get some additional income benefit from the fungicide. Or if a grower is producing foundation or certified seed, which has a higher value than just bin run wheat seed or other small grains, then there's a income potential gain from using a fungicide, as well as a quality benefit on top of any yield gains, because you get a much plumper and larger seed as a result, more uniform seed. Over the years, as I mentioned earlier, we tend to see more disease issues in Southwest Alabama or South Alabama than we do anywhere else in the state as far as wheat is concerned. So in those high disease pressure areas, those are the locations when we tend to see a yield benefit and an income benefit out of using fungicides. And we're particularly addressing the rust diseases, septoria, powdery mildew. When you get into scab, it's a little bit different situation, because we can have scab outbreaks anywhere in the state. In the past, they used to think and used to have more issues, it seemed like, with it in the Tennessee Valley, but in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had severe scab outbreaks down, for example, in Baldwin County. So the disease does have a statewide distribution, and it doesn't matter where it develops. It's going to cause the same issues with poor grain quality and the mycotoxin contamination. So for scab issues, if the risk is high, regardless of where you are in the state, you may need to spray. So we like to see folks scout fields, several locations in each field, to monitor the foliar disease that we talked about. Monitor weather patterns, because the wetter it is, warmer it is, the more likely you are to have disease issues. There are a lot of fungicides in the marketplace, so growers need to look at what their disease spectrum is, how much cost they want to put into the crop, and make an appropriate fungicide decision. There are generics out there that are relatively inexpensive and will provide adequate control in moderate disease pressure situations, but they're also, particularly in some of the name brand products, are the go-to materials when you're under high disease pressure. And growers, particularly if they scout, have the option of coming with 1 or 2 applications. And this is just a listing of all the products that are available for use on small grains. Just about, or in fact, all of them are labeled for use on wheat. When you get into barley, oats, and triticale, you gotta pick and choose a little bit, because some of them are labeled, some of them are not. And when you're dealing with a food and feed crop, you do have to make sure that the product is registered specifically for that crop, and not just assume because it's a small grain that you can apply it to whatever crop you want to. Very quickly, I'm just going to touch on barley yellow dwarf. I'm sure Kathy's going to talk a little bit more about aphid management, so I'm going to leave all that to her, but it is an aphid-transmitted virus disease, green bug being the primary vector, but there's probably more, and a lot more, and probably with the conditions we've had this year, it's going to be less of a problem, and it's mainly we could avoid the problem with early planting and some insecticide programs. So basically, that's all I had to go over today. And if there's anything that I need to address, let me know. Drop me an email, and we'll try and get the information out. Thank you.
I got a question for you, and Brandon may have some later. I run into this with the insecticides, because it's lots of times people can't afford to be scouting their wheat, because especially with the prices the way they are. If you can only put a fungicide on once in North, Central, and South Alabama, when would you put that fungicide on?
If we're not talking about scab, when the flag leaf is fully emerged, because we want to, the most important thing is that the flag leaf stay intact as long as possible.
Okay, so that's going to be key right there.
Yes.
In your mind. And then if weather conditions are right and they can use the forecast rather than scouting.
Right, with the scab, you've got to
do that one, but that's a much later spray.
Yeah, with the scab, you're going to have to use the. You either base it on weather patterns and cropping history, or you can use the weather-based model as a means of determining whether or not you want to go ahead and apply a fungicide. Because when you deal with scab, you are dealing with name brand products, and probably Prosero is the preferred material at this point in time, Carumba being the other one. And so, and And those are expensive treatments and really only need to be used in situations where they're more than likely the grower's going to see a quality and a yield benefit.
Okay. Well, Joyce said she was on her way.
Oh.
I didn't tell her the wrong place. Yes. So I guess I will go ahead and talk about scouting, which sort of fits in with your diseases anyway, and then we'll come back to Joyce. So thank you, Austin.
Hang around.
All right.
Why you need on it?
Screen sharing has stopped. That's good. So, all right, I'm going to go see if I can.
There she is.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Hey, Joyce.
Hey, Kathy.
If you.
I don't have a presentation. I'm just going to talk.
Oh, you're just going to talk? Well, that's easy. Why don't you just come right over here? Because I got all my stuff in the way and people will sort of see you over here. Do not minimize Zoom while you are recording. Okay, fine. So we can go ahead, Joyce, and
Where do I go?
come sit where I am in a
Where
minute.
you are.
And this way people will be able to see you.
Okay.
So we appreciate you coming. Talk to us a little bit about weeds.
Okay. Okay, where's the camera?
Right there.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about ryegrass control in small grains, particularly wheat, just because wheat has more that are labeled, but in small grains altogether. We ran some tests. We've got some newer products that are labeled. I talked with you a little bit about those last year, but we've got some newer products that are labeled, and we've done some testing on that, and we're continuing to test those. And you'll see some of those in the new IPM guide, which is what I'm getting at right here. There's a lot of resistant ryegrass out there. So, and it's not just resistant to one chemical. Whole-on resistance has been out there for a long time. You also have glyphosate resistance, and that is becoming more and more prevalent. So you need to be aware of that. So we've got some things as far as, control in season that are available that haven't been available in the past. And we also have some standards that are good, like Axiom. Those are some that have been available that are still really good and will work well for you. There is a chance that you will have, you might be seeing some ALS resistance show up. We haven't seen it so far with ryegrass, but that's something to be aware of. And if you do see it, make sure you contact your county agent and let them know, or your regional agent, or let me know. With our test, now I have in the recommendations that for a delayed pre, and I went over this last year, that Zidua is labeled delayed pre, and that's pyroxasulfone. We did some testing where we put it out, delayed pre as well as early post-emergence. We actually got better control early post-emergence with that. We only have 1 year worth of data, and so we're putting it out again to see if we get the same results. But just wanted to recognize that I've got it under delayed pre and early post for that reason, because we did see those results. Again, you've got several options for ryegrass control. Axial is probably going to be the most used, the most widely used for ryegrass control. It does control other grasses as well. You have Anthem Flex, that's another one, and it has AIM plus Zidua in it. We're looking at that this year in some trials as well. You also have And on those two, they're labeled in wheat. Now, Axial's labeled in wheat and barley, but we're not a big barley state, so that's not going to help a whole lot. Axiom is another ryegrass material, and it's labeled in wheat and triticale, but then again, we don't grow a lot of triticale. So, you know, for example, with Harmony Extra, you could put that on oats and you can put it on wheat, although it has minimal ryegrass control. Very good on broadleaves, but it's got minimal ryegrass control. So, in other words, you're not going to be able to spray this on your rye and on your oats. You're going to have to be looking just at your wheat when you're putting these out. There's some other things like Osprey that are available, Peak. These are some things that you can put out, but they're not very popular in our area. And again, those are ALSs, and so you have to be careful about that as well. So, you know, the main thing is if you can control your ryegrass early. Now, this year is a little bit different because of the drought. So we didn't have really much of anything coming up if you did get to plant. I know in our experience, some of our plots didn't get planted until November, December. Some were middle of December. So it was very, very late, but it was, you know, we had not at all. Yeah. So, you know, that was an issue that we had to deal with. Yet ryegrass still came up. So you could burn it down with gramoxone or with Roundup unless you had Roundup resistant ryegrass, which is an issue because if you finally did get to plant when you got some moisture and you had ryegrass present, then you've already started a battle you're not going to win. So you needed to make sure that you had a clean slate to start with, which is what I always tell people, is to make sure you start clean. But once that ryegrass starts coming up after we get through this cold weather, and it's going to start coming up, you know, around, depending on where you live, but it's going to start coming up when the weather starts to break some, and it's going to come on strong. Well, that's when you need to start getting rid of it. That's when you need to spray it, and you just to spray it when it's small. You also need to watch the timeliness of your wheat. For example, you've got specific dates when you can, specific timings when you can spray your wheat. And I have to put on my glasses to be able to tell you what they are because I can't see anymore. And I can't see without the lights on either. Thank you. For example, the Zidua I said that is an early post-emergence. You can spray it up from tillering up to the 4th tiller stage. I mean, from emergence to the 4th tillering stage. Anthem Flex is from spiking to the 4th tiller stage. Axial, you've got a much, you can apply from the 2-leaf to the pre-boot stage, so you've got a much wider window. Another reason why a lot of people like to use that. So make sure that you see what those are. Now, most of these are going to have planting requirements that, which now is not going to matter, but you needed to plant it at least 1 to 2 inches deep so that it will not hurt the wheat. And it's also going to have requirements on the size of the ryegrass. It'll need to be 4 inches or 2 inches in size. It'll have different requirements depending on what you're spraying. And if you go over that, then it won't guarantee anything. So that's something else to look at. Of course, these products are going to control different things. For example, Anthem Flex is going to control some broadleaf materials, just like Zidua will. As I said, Axial will control, sorry, I don't know how to turn it off. Axial is going to control a wide range of grasses, but it's always, as cheap as something like Harmony is, it's always a good idea to put that in there with it if you do have, you know, henbit and chickweed and those type of broadleaf weeds. And that's it.
All right. Well, thank you for that good update. just to remind everybody that it's important because there are lots of changes that happen from year to year with these IPM guides. And so we spend a lot of time making sure that we have the latest information for you in the latest versions of the guide. So you go to alabamacrops.com and you click on the IPM guide section on there on the left, you'll be able to get the most up-to-date version, whatever version that is. So we have 2017 ready for almost all of our crops now. Ready for you to take a look at. That's alabamacrops.com. Click on the IPM guides and always make sure you're working off the most current version because things do change considerably from year to year.
Yes, they do.
All right.
All right.
Any
Who's
questions for Joyce?
Quick question.
Okay.
How popular are the Clearfield varieties still in there? Is that technology being utilized at all around the
Not
state?
here.
Do you know?
Not here, no. In fact, I don't think they've ever taken off here. They have in other areas, but not here.
Great. Thank you, Joyce.
You're welcome. Fast and painless.
Yeah. I think mine will be fairly quick too. I'm going to talk a little bit about scouting for insects.
I have to go to a
All right. I just sent an email to the superintendents to be prepared to put something on for ryegrass on my garlic plots. Because they told me about this all
Okay, so we might want to dim the lights again
Yes.
because my slides are pretty bright and blinding. I'm not sure if that's better or worse, but I want to talk a little bit about what we can do to kind of scout here in the wintertime. Again, with prices, people may not be able to afford to scout very often, but if they're going to scout, probably the best time to do it is right about now, from now till mid-February, whenever you're getting ready to think about putting out your fertilizer, because if necessary, you can mix in an insecticide. So in the wintertime, we're concerned with two groups of insects, the aphids primarily because they're spreading barley yellow dwarf virus. And I'm going to start again, and I apologize, because I don't think I officially shared my screen with this PowerPoint presentation. So if I can figure out how to escape from this, everybody forgive me just a minute. All right, so. All right, I'm closing Austin, and I hope when I do that, I'm not closing me. I'm going to share screen, scouting for small grain insects. Okay. So, Brandon, for posterity, I'm going to start again here. So we're talking about scouting for small grain insects in the wintertime is what I want to talk a little bit about. There's a couple of different insects that we are concerned about. We're concerned because of the aphids, primarily because they are spreading a bad disease called barley yellow dwarf virus. And we're also concerned about Hessian fly because it is a chronic pest and can be a problem. Now, these insects, while they are different groups and belong to different taxonomic groups and are not closely related and damage the plants in different ways, they're very similar to the point that they have multiple generations per year. And the warmer it is, the faster they grow. So in a years with a warm winter, we could have extra generations of aphids. We could have an extra generation of the Hessian fly. So they're similar from the standpoint that they are active whenever the weather warms up enough. So later on this week, we're scheduled to be in the 70s, so we can easily have these insects developing there. I think their lower thresholds are probably around 50 degrees or something. So anytime the temperature is above that, they could be growing. So again, here's a picture of barley yellow dwarf virus. That's why we're very concerned about our aphids. We have a lot of information about managing barley yellow dwarf virus. Austin and I and several others put together this publication. You can get this off the www.aces.edu and read more about barley yellow dwarf virus. I'm not going to go into the details right now. I do want to point out that when we're out looking for aphids can look a little bit different sometimes because they do have wings on occasion. You can see all of these that have come in here have their wings on them, but there are also fully functioning adult aphids that don't have wings, and here are some pictures of some of those. So the bird cherry oat aphid is the primary vector, we believe, for barley yellow dwarf virus in our region, and rice root aphid can also bring in barley yellow dwarf virus. Other aphids also can occur, but you're looking at these little sacks of goo, basically, and you can tell they're aphids because they have most of them have these little tailpipes sticking out the back end, relatively long antennae, and so they're usually kind of like clustered in herds because the mother, when she gives birth to her live young, she may sort of stay in the same place with her babies. So you often kind of see them, if there's more than one aphid, you may kind of see them in almost like a little herd of cows, and they're sucking insects. Their aphids are sometimes hard to scout for because they hang out on the undersides of the leaves, or they're feeding down at the bases of the stem. In cold weather, they move down to the base of the plant, and they may be actually down below ground. And when wheat is small, it's a long way down to get to that wheat, so it is sometimes hard to scout for because you've got to kind of crawl along and try to see the aphids. So therefore, we basically try to predict the risk about having barley yellow dwarf virus from the work that we've done in previous years, because it's often not economical to scout the small grains as often as you would need to technically to try to figure out what was happening with the aphid populations. So we know that the earlier that wheat is infected, the greater the yield loss we're going to have from barley yellow dwarf and its corresponding disease, cereal yellow dwarf virus. So we're worried about this thing mainly through the end of February, first part of March. Beyond that, there's no point in putting out an insecticide and trying to control the aphid spore to protect your yield from barley yellow dwarf virus. Generally, we're worried about controlling those aphids early. So historically, we can make a few general recommendations, but of course this year when everybody planted late, things sort of go out the window. But generally, our recommendations are, if you're going to be planting small grains during the recommended planting date for grains, a seed treatment or a foliar spray 30 days after planting is going to be what pays off more often than not in North Alabama. In South Alabama, it's generally that late winter spray, late January, early February, either with or without fertilizer, seems to be when it's most likely to pay off. And with all of our late planted wheat, that's going to be the time to be applying a spray for barley yellow dwarf virus if you have the money to sort of put on the spray. Central Alabama is when we're planting normally in late October, early November. It could have time and be warm enough for substantial development in the fall as well as in the winter. So sometimes the optimum situation for Central Alabama may be to spray twice, and we really may not be able to afford that, but spraying either 30 days after planting or as the aphids are picking up and starting to develop in the late winter. Either one was better than not spraying at all, but two might be optimal. So again, with this late planting that we're looking at this year, where most everybody got their plants in late, we'd say that probably we would recommend putting on a spray in late January or early February. Barley yellow dwarf is one of our biggest, would you say, Austin, sort of unrecognized disease problem that we have.
Yeah, the symptoms are not real clear cut. That's
So-
the problem.
right.
In wheat, you get
And-
oats and barley, it'll jump out at you. But in wheat,
Right.
it's really hard to tell.
So you could be having yield loss not knowing it, and by the time you see the symptoms, it's already spread. So this is why it's a tough thing. And so normally I don't tell people to put on sprays just on a routine basis. If anybody who knows me will know that. But this is one of the exceptions that I think that everybody, if you're going for high production wheat, ought to be putting on one spray for barley yellow dwarf virus. And that we, sort of hedge our bets based on historical data when the best time to put that spray on is. Having said that, if you can go out and look for wheat at in the wintertime, you may find that you've got an unexpected number of aphids, even though you did have already sprayed. Our thresholds are generally, if you're out looking, if before the wheat has started to elongate, if you've got 6 aphids or more per square foot, per row foot, or once the stems start elongating, if you're finding 2 aphids per stem. Now, if you're going to go out and scout for aphids, you want to go out when the weather is nice, and that's for several reasons. The insects tend to be hiding, hunkered down when it's cold, and you're going to be cranky, or at least I am, when I go out and try to scout for aphids. If it's 40 degrees and I'm freezing to death, I'm not going to do a good job crawling on the ground counting those aphids, and you aren't either. So what you really want to do is pick a nice day, above 60 degrees. The insects will have crawled up if they're going to by the middle of the day. And that would be the time, if you're going to go out and look for aphids, that would be the time to do it. Now, we have a new kid on the block, which is called Siphomatus. The common name we're hoping to be is going to be the hedgehog grain aphid, because this little aphid has got little spines all over it. Here's mama here, and these are all her babies. You see these little they kind of occur in herds. Generally, the babies are kind of amber colored. The mother is more blackish colored, and if you look at them with a hand lens or a microscope, you see that they do have these hairs all over them. This is a new aphid. We know it's occurring throughout central Alabama. We don't know what kind of role it's going to have in terms of making our barley yellow dwarf problem worse. So if anybody's out looking at their wheat and they happen to see this aphid, please let me know, or one of your extension agents let them know about this aphid. So the other thing I want to talk about is that now's a good time to go out and just look at your wheat and assess the general health of the wheat. You want to be out and looking to see, and hopefully we're not going to have problems with Hessian fly. Hessian fly, like aphids, the earlier you plant, the more likely you're going to have a problem with this multi-generational insect, but it can occur on any different kind of planting date. What you want to be looking for is you just want to start looking for plants that just don't look right. So I want to point out that so sort of your normal wheat, it looks like here's the sick plant right here. Can you see how this leaf, the base of the middle part of this leaf blade here on this plant is not even above the ground here. So it looks like the leaf blade is sticking right out of the ground. It's just not growing right. When you go out and you look at a field that's infested with Hessian fly, that's going to probably be your first assessment, is this field just doesn't look right. Here's a close-up. You can see how these leaf blades look like they're kind of coming out of the ground. They're kind of bunched together, and they're kind of a blue-green, kind of dull, greasy color. Here's a nice, clean, happy plant over here with the leaves coming out, and you see the leaf sheath comes out here, and then the leaf blade sticks out. I think those are the terms. Here's another one. Can you see that wide blue leaf blade there? Kind of a thin stand. Again, wide blue leaf blade coming right out of the ground. That's a sign that that plant's stunted and not growing right. Chances are the problem is going to be Hessian fly, although lesser cornstalk borer can also have this look. So this is what you want to have. You want to have your plants, leaf sheaths coming out of the ground, and but here the leaf blades are coming right there at ground level. Just doesn't look right. Here's another one. Here's another one here. Here's Rudy Yates out there in a field that was heavily infested with Hessian fly. One of the problems that you can get when it attacks early is it can kill the plants outright. Especially it's a cold snap. They finish them off if they're kind of lingering on and weakened from Hessian fly. So this is a field that was badly damaged. very thin stand. This is what the Hessian fly looks like. If you start looking, you're going to be pulling your leaf sheath away from the base of the plant and start looking for the larvae, which are these little white things with a green line going through them, or these are the pupal stage right here. Here's another example, just kind of showing you here are the larvae, here are the pupae that were, we pulled the leaf sheath away, and there they were. There was a bunch of them. So how these got down here is that the adult Hessian fly lays her eggs on the leaf blade, and then that little maggot hatches out and crawls slowly down and down behind the leaf sheath and goes down as far as it can go. So before jointing occurs, it's going to go right down to the base of the plant as far as it can go behind that leaf sheath. Once the plant starts to joint and this little maggot is crawling its way down, it gets stuck at the joint. So as later in the season, the Hessian fly infestation and where you'd be looking for Hessian fly will change, just because the infestation proceeds further up the plant as the plant grows. So here's just, here's the point. Wheat just doesn't look right. In the back, here's a resistant variety here that's growing nicely, and here's a variety here that's badly infested with Hessian fly, and you can see that there are very few heads out there. Here's some real-life examples out there in some fields. Unfortunately, we had a bad epidemic somewhere around 2009, 2010. Most of these pictures are from that time. Again, this wheat just doesn't look right. Lots of dead tillers. That's another sign later on. The thin, sparse stand and the dead tillers are signs of Hessian fly. Stunted plants. Wheat isn't supposed to be this thin or this short. It was just a bad Hessian fly year. This is what the adult looks like. It looks like a lot of other flies. So if we have them in a pheromone trap that's with something attracting the adult flies, and we have just a few flies on that trap, we can kind of pick out what they look like. Little beaded antennae here and long legs like a mosquito. One thing is that when they bleed red. And I'm pointing this out just because this is a sad little fly that was trying to get off this sticky trap, and it tore its foot off, and it bled this little red hemolymph. It's blood. But red, that's just a sign. I want everybody to kind of remember that red color. Anyway, those adults come out, they lay the eggs in the leaves. The eggs hatch, little maggots go down at the bottom of the plant. The problem is that when we're trying to control Hessian fly, they are protected in the plant for most of their life, so it's really hard to spray them with a foliar insecticide. All we can do is try to get the adults, when they're out flying around and laying eggs, the eggs or the little maggots as they are hatching from the egg and crawling down the rest of that leaf blade to go behind the leaf sheath. So we have a relatively narrow window if we try to spray for Hessian fly. Rescue may be possible, but we're best going to be controlling Hessian fly by decisions that are made before planting. And I'm just going to go through these briefly. It's a long list. All of these are just designed to reduce your problems. Avoid continuous planting of wheat in the same field because the pupae over summer in the field. So if you come right back in the next fall, they're going to say, thank you, I'm here and ready, and thank you for putting wheat back in my field. Select the Hessian fly resistant variety. Control the volunteer wheat, which can be allowing the flies to build up early in the fall, like in September. Don't plant your wheat before the recommended planting date. If you're going to use grazing, try to plant rye, oats, or a Hessian fly resistant wheat, because generally all these grazing things are planted early. That can allow the Hessian flies to build up early and then fly into the wheat produced for grain. As an entomologist, I love plowing to vary the wheat debris, especially right after harvest. Lots of people can't do that, but if you can, that kind of buries those pupae. Don't use a susceptible wheat for wildlife planting. I think this is pretty huge because wildlife plantings are put in early, and what can happen is that you can build up your Hessian flies early. That picture of Rudy Yates out there in that wheat field, that wheat is out in an area where there's lots of little wildlife plots scattered around that build up the Hessian fly. That's sort of a chronic hotspot. If you're going to grow a susceptible wheat, consider using a high rate of an insecticide seed treatment, or spraying the foliar insecticide at the 2-leaf stage to try to control that early infestation, which is the most devastating. Those are some of the IPM recommendations we have. But if you get to the point at this time of year, you go out in your field and you say, this wheat just doesn't look right. Well, then start trying to think about how many of these tillers don't look right. Start pulling the leaves back and looking for the flies. And if you've got a thin stand, or if you've got more than 20% of your tillers that are infested with the Hessian fly, your yield potential is seriously compromised for that field. Because we're not only talking about what's already happened, but the fact that there can be another generation of the Hessian fly coming along. So that nitrogen application may not pay off. So the decision might just be to think about just saying, I'm not going to harvest this field. So, or I'm not going to put the nitrogen application on. I'm going to save my inputs and just harvest it for hay or something. So that's one thing to think about is at this time of year is, am I so badly infested that it's not worth going on? Now, it may be possible, and we've had some luck here, and there's some data from North Carolina years ago, that you might be able to rescue a field. If you go out at this time of year and you find you've got some maggots or you've got some pupae in the field, and it's 5-10% or even 20%, but you really think that this field's got potential in terms of being a good stand, and you're willing to go out a couple times a week while during this stage right now, or and keep an eye on the development of the Hessian flies. So they're not always all on the same stage, but they are sort of pretty much clustered. So when you go out, you're probably going to find they're either like late stage maggots or they're pupae. Now, you're going to want to spray the pyrethroid insecticide when these adults are starting to emerge. How do you know when the adults are starting to emerge, when they look like every other little fly out there in the field? Well, what you can do is you can squeeze the pupae. So you see these brown things here. If you squeeze this and it's mostly white, it means that it's close to being in this stage, this larval stage. This is the stage where it transformed from the larval to the adult. But if you squeeze this pupa and it's pink, you remember how I showed you that picture of that Hessian fly adult on the trap with the little bleeding, the little pink hemolymph? When you're squeezing these pupae and they're starting to be pink, that's a sign they're getting closer to the adult stage and they're more likely to be, they're about to be coming out. That's the time when the pupae are pink to kind of start looking for some eggs on the plant too. Once you maybe want to see a few of the eggs, or once you just start seeing that these pupae are turning pink, wait a few days, and then that would be a good time to put on this rescue pyrethroid spray if you're going to try to do that in a field. Here's a picture of the eggs. They're kind of hard to see. They kind of glisten. They're about 1/32 of an inch long. Takes about 3 to 5 days for them to hatch. So you see, if you start seeing some eggs there on the field, on the leaves, I think if you spray, that residue of the insecticide is going to be on there, and as these little larvae are making their way down, they're going to be impacted by that. So that's if you're going to try to do a rescue spray for your Hessian fly. So there's a lot of information about this. If you go to www.aces.edu, or you go to alabamacrops.com, just search on Hessian fly. And what you're going to be looking for, we have a fact sheet on the Hessian fly, and we also have a timely information sheet on how to scout for the Hessian fly in the wintertime. There will be some more information for you. So here's a fact sheet that I was talking about that you can find. And does anybody have any questions?
One of the things you mentioned, game food plots and wheat.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be better if we encourage people to grow oats, or would maybe rye be a better choice rather as an early plant?
I think so, yes. As far as Hessian fly.
Rather than planting wheat, I don't.
Yeah, I think so. As far as Hessian fly, especially in these areas or spots where there seems to be a chronic hot spot for.
Would help with bark, but no, would help.
It might make barley yellow dwarf worse. That's the only problem with oats.
I just thought about that.
But they're sort of a host for all the small grains are a host for barley yellow dwarf.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So I think it may not matter if they're going to plant early. Yeah,
but I don't like seeing wheat planted early particularly for Hessian fly. If they go out with I would think a susceptible variety and have a large buildup on September planted wheat, And then you, well, as you said before, and then you have wheat fields in the general vicinity, you're just flooding them with flies.
That,
And even if they're resistant, you're pushing.
you're putting
Put
pressure
pressure
on
on
that
them.
resistance. That's right. So it's all a numbers game with Hessian fly. It's just that, how much pressure are we going to have? And one thing that Brenda Ortiz found out, working with some historical data from David Button, was that there are certain years that are going to be more conducive to having problems with Hessian flies. So the La Nina phase of El Nino, where we're going to get that warmer, drier winter, is going to be favorable. And also, what was very critical is if there's some rain going on in the early fall, and from anywhere from late August to early October, if there's rain during that time. And the biological reason for that is because if you get rain at that time, it's a signal for those Hessian flies that were over summering in that pupal stage for those adults to emerge and come out and start the generation. So those are sort of 2 times we know. So if you're thinking, if you want to know when the greatest risk is going to be, it's going to be in those La Nina years when we have when we have some rain. This year we didn't have rain during that period, so that's one thing that sort of led to a probably a lower infestation and a lower risk from Hessian fly this year, even though we're technically, I think we're in the La Nina phase, so it's going to be sort of warmer and drier. You wouldn't know it from how much rain we've had in the last week or so. But yeah, so that is the Hessian fly. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stop sharing here. So Brandon and Dennis, we have a couple of other presentations that were pre-recorded. We have Eddie McGriff, who's done a presentation on high-yielding corn. And we have Jessica Kelton, who has done a presentation on sort of an economic outlook. So what I'm going to go do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to paste those links into the chat box for you. I'm going to try anyway. And let me just go find them here.
Yeah, I've got a meeting at 10:30 about that, actually.
All right. We're basically done.
Sure.
I'm just going to paste those links in here. Okay, if all goes well, my plan is to copy this hyperlink.
I got one. It's needed. I usually did the bolsters in the stern a year or 2 ago, so they're all fresh and clean. And, so we kept the boat up. Whoever we bought it.
Okay, so this is
1998. Work.
okay. Oh my.
She worked for 5 or 6 years after that. She's
All right.
her stuff.
Okay, so we have this hyperlink. So now I think I am going to be able to paste that for you. Well, Dennis and Brandon, I am going to go ahead and email you those links. So I apologize and thank you for your patience here because it looks like that's not going to let me copy these links for you, and I don't know why, and I'll have that solved by next month. But thank you all, and we'll see you next month.
Okay, thank you.
Good to hear from you, Brandon. Thanks for tuning in.